Hey everyone, welcome to Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast. This podcast is all about farmers markets. Whether you're a farmers market manager or a small farmer, food maker, or artisan selling at farmers markets, you have found just the right podcast.
I'm Cat Fields-White.
And I'm Bridget Myers. We're longtime farmers market managers, educators, and consultants. Get ready to catch up on all things farmers market pros with us. During this season of Tent Talk, we're bringing you episodes on navigating the challenges and recognizing the opportunities to survive and thrive in 2025 and beyond at your farmers market. Honestly, plenty of things haven't changed. In this episode, let's look at sticking to some of the basics to succeed.
Today's episode of Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast, is supported by the Catamaran Resort. Located right on the sand at beautiful Pacific Beach in San Diego, California. The Catamaran hosts the 10th annual Intense National Farmers Market Conference, March 1st through 4th, 2026. Enjoy a view of Mission Bay from the meeting spaces, guest rooms, and the hot tub. The Pacific Ocean is just across the street. The Tuesday Farmers Market is just a quick stroll away, and a wide range of restaurants, taco stands, and coffee houses are within blocks. Stay on site at the Catamaran during the Intense Conference and consider bringing friends or family and splurging on a few extra nights. You deserve a vacation. To register, click the Catamaran logo on the resource page at farmersmarketpros.com.
Welcome back to Tent Talk, everybody. We are talking in this season about surviving and even more thriving at farmers markets in 2025 and beyond. Let's get back to the basics of how you can control your market or market business success.
Right? You can do so many things.
You can do all the things.
Yeah. Learn from each other. Learn from us.
Yeah.
Do the math. Make it all work.
Do the work, crunch the things, have fun, still have time for yourself.
That's right.
And still have a successful business that you're running. But we'll kind of bring it back. Sometimes we get too excited about new ideas or new ways of doing things, which is great, but it's nice to
or new disasters in the news. I mean, there's all that.
All of those new things. And change is hard and change is like stimulating, so let's try to just bring stuff back to basics, stuff that we know, that feels familiar, that we can just fine tune and do well and succeed with that.
That's right.
Yep.
So we've seen some disruption in funding, in grants, in nutrition incentives, and that's disturbing.
So disturbing.
No doubt about it.
Terrifying.
The abrupt interruptions earlier this year in reimbursements hurt a lot of organizations and a lot of farmers. Organizations focused on education and social services that happen at the markets. But that's not all that happens at markets. Those things are actually an extension of a successful, thriving market. With or without grant funds, you can't do all those extra things unless your core farmers market is strong.
Exactly. So we try to remind folks, hey, if these things that are out of your control, feels like sometimes very much out of your control sometimes, just, that's taking up a lot of your brain space, focusing on those things, maybe try to take that time and energy and revamp some of the other ways that your market can control the way that it's succeeding and bringing funds in and all of those things.
Yeah. So what's our core purpose?
Providing a place for farmers and makers to sell at a financial advantage over wholesale.
I mean, that's really what farmers markets are for.
Yep.
And then that creates a situation where you're creating a community gathering place and you're bringing healthy food to your neighbors.
Yes, you can do all of those things with that just core value system set up.
And that's a great jumping off point for all other kinds of programs. But making sure the core is strong is the key to being ready to add those extra features.
Exactly. I think if your core is that you're using grant funds to give things to other people, that is just something that is...
That's awesome.
That's so great.
But it's not a farmer's market.
It's not a farmer's market, and you can't be in control of long-lasting success, which is what we really need to think about. People have to eat every single day. We need to build these systems that are able to stand on their own no matter what, weather any kind of changes, go with the flow of what's happening in society and be there for customers so that they can eat and farmers can farm.
Yeah. I mean, if farmers stop farming, that's when we're really in trouble.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So just reminding ourselves about that.
Yeah. So we want to be in that core business.
Yep.
And to do that, we need to make sure the math is mathing.
The math is mathing. We say that a lot at our market. My assistant market manager, Tristan, says that a lot when she's calculating all sorts of things at the market. She goes, oh, the math mathed. So it's important to really remember that kind of phrase, or however you want to remind yourself, like make the numbers make sense for you.
Right.
Yep.
I mean, that's the only way this is going to work.
Yep.
As in any business, straightforward profit and loss math, whether for market operators or market participants, the farmers and the vendors, each of those folks has to be sure that their profit and loss is leaning to that profit side if the market is going to be sustainable and long lasting.
Yep, exactly. So what can you bring in? What will it cost to you? Just as we tell vendors, let's start with costs.
Yeah.
Yep.
We start there to see what it's going to cost us to do it so we can determine if we can produce something that can be sold. In the case of a cookie, what can you get for that cookie? In the case of market operators, what can you get for that space? Let's see what it's going to cost us first, and then we can see if we can cover all that with a reasonable amount of income.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's sometimes market operators don't think about their business like that because we're not selling like something in a bag that folks take home, or we're not selling like a service. It doesn't seem like a service, and so they're not sure how to price their booth spaces, like what to charge the vendors. But you should put your booth space fees together the same way your baker is putting their cookie fees together. It's cost of ingredients. So
Right.
what are the ingredients of your market?
That's exactly it. I mean, so all markets basically deal with the same chart of accounts. Now, if you're doing a lot of social service add-ons or you're doing a lot of educational programming, that's not the core of your market, but that is what you consider an essential part, that's awesome. That's going to be a different list. But what we're talking about is keeping the core going. So the basic chart of accounts for markets is going to be venue, equipment, operating costs, staff, and marketing.
Yep.
And all markets are the same in that way. Now, you can make it a very big, complicated market with a lot of fancy schmancy stuff. You can make it a smaller market. We were just having a conversation with some folks that were saying, oh, well, you're lucky you can do this because you've got a big, busy market. Well, not a single one of those big, busy markets sprung from the earth that way. They all started small and built up because we didn't have big grants. So, we were doing something that had to be financially sustainable on its own. Usually a little sponsorship money or business improvement district or chamber of commerce or somebody that could invest in the startup piece. But our very first market, we just did kind of bootstrapped it, and we grew as fast as our audience wanted us to grow.
Exactly. Yep. So thinking about those costs that go into kind of the basics of the market and what makes the market operate. So venue, or as they call it in retail, occupancy cost.
That's right.
So every market has that somehow.
Yeah. So you may have a lease on a private piece of property. You may have public space where probably the cost of that is going to be related to permits. Or you can have donated space from another business that wants to increase activity in its area, and they give you a parking lot or some space within some other kind of center where you can set up.
Yeah.
The lower you can get this, the better, obviously. We do know of markets that are paying big lease rental rates to be in a certain kind of property or a certain location, and you can do that, but generally speaking, you can't do it right at the beginning. So location, but look for the very best location at the very lowest cost, obviously.
Exactly. And if you're growing your market, or your market's been around for a while, and there's new costs that are associated with using some kind of space that maybe you've always used and now they're charging for it. Or in our case, we are on a city street, but then now, it's been a few years now, but there's an associated cost with towing vehicles off the street now, where there was not before. And so, but I choose to pay that cost because that location is so vital to the success of the market and it's a busy area. And so you kind of weigh those costs.
Sure.
I'm going to pay this because it's going to make the market more successful. So the ROI is
Right.
good on that fee. So just kind of weighing those costs.
Yep.
Yep.
Insurance, I think we would wrap into the venue cost. You're going to have insurance on your site, general liability insurance. And in some cases, there's utility costs. So some lucky markets have electricity or water already on site, and they pay maybe a little bit extra for that.
Lucky ducks.
Yeah, heaven knows. If it was available to me, I would have figured out how to cover that.
Oh my gosh, I will pay for that if it ever springs from the ground
Right.
by my market.
Equipment tends to be a higher startup cost, but fairly minimal ongoing costs in my experience at markets. So, to get going, you're going to need that info booth tent. You're going to need tables. You're going to need garbage cans, barricades to block cars out of your market, signage to let people know that road's closed. So that kind of thing. So that's somewhat dependent on the venue in terms of those kind of costs, but those are the sorts of things that you're probably going to need to get started with. On an ongoing basis, there's not a lot of equipment cost unless you're replacing a tent periodically or that kind of thing.
It's mostly just replacing things. I mean, we just got new candlestick barricades, and we've had those for a long time. They're looking very ragtag, and they weren't doing an effective job because the bottoms, you want to replace it when your safety equipment is not safe anymore,
Right.
like if your bottom is rotting out and things are tipping over. But really that they last a long time. I'd say the only maybe equipment cost I've had to add on is when I'm expanding. So if I'm taking over a new block and I need new barricades to block off a new block. So those kind of things. But I mean, if you get decent quality equipment to begin with, that's just like a one-time purchase.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's not so much of an ongoing expense, but it is an expense for startup. Your staff is a key expense, so you're going to need a manager, hopefully an assistant manager, depending on what size you are when you start. And then some of that can be supplemented with volunteer help. Be careful about that, unless it's a board member or somebody associated with a nonprofit that's involved in this in some key, fully integrated way. There are labor law considerations. And honestly, from a philosophical standpoint, we like to pay people for the work that they do. So volunteers we see more as a project-based kind of addition to your staff. But one way or another, you're going to need some staff. That's a key expense.
Exactly. Yep. And I think volunteers can be really helpful in a lot of ways. They can also sometimes be more unreliable just because they're not as committed because it's not a full job. And so is that going to cost you your time on the back end to try to manage all of that when it would be easier just to pay someone to help you, and then you can, know what you're expecting. They're going to show up and you can use your time for other things. So it kind of balances out on that.
I know some markets are run by municipalities, so maybe it's a Parks and Rec employee that's doing it. I'm going to guess that you still have to develop a budget that goes into your Parks and Rec department, which goes into your city council that shows the cost of that staff versus the cost of anything you're doing to mitigate the overhead of that market by charging booth fees or generating sponsorships or what have you. So you may be an employee that's already in place that's running a market, but you're probably at some point going to have to balance whatever you're making against what the market's bringing in.
Exactly. And we've talked to a lot of people. I know we talked to some folks when we were at the Main Street America conference, and they had maybe even started out volunteers running the whole market or employees of Parks and Rec. But the market grew, it was doing well and it was growing and it was taking more of their time during the week where either they couldn't volunteer anymore. It didn't make sense for them to put in that many free hours, or it kind of went beyond their really laid out responsibilities as an employee somewhere for a government agency. And so keeping that in mind, even if it works for you now, keep in mind, what is your threshold? What if I go over this many hours a week, that's going to push me into what? You need to know that I'm going to get paid for this, or this is the cost exchange for that. So keeping that in mind as your market grows.
Right. Operating overhead, maybe you're going to sign up and use a market management platform. Those can save you a lot of time in other ways, so you balance that out when you do it. General renewable operating supplies, trash bags, printed forms to collect email addresses or track your market day or your EBT machine tape. So there's a lot of little expenses that don't add up to a ton of money, but they do add up, and you've got to include them in the cost of producing that market.
Yeah, don't forget about all those little things that you pay for, because at the end of the day, when you're looking at your, P&L for the year, you're going to say, oh, what is this $500 expense? Oh, pens and paper and
Trash bags?
So, just keep making sure to include everything that's a cost to you when operating your market.
Right. Marketing is absolutely one of those expenses that needs to be protected. People take for granted that could be an add-on or something extra, but it's not. It's absolutely a key expense. You have to generate attendees so that you can generate participants. You have to have participants to generate attendees. All of those things takes outreach. And so there's expenses associated with that.
Yeah, exactly. Just remember that I think we had a conversation going in our Facebook group and someone said, oh yeah, I did yard signs. So I got, 20 blank yard signs, pretty cheap at the hardware store. I painted a design on it, come to the market, all the days and times. I asked neighbors in the surrounding area who would be willing to put a sign in there. And then I went out and I staked it in their ground and da-da-da. It worked really well. It was so great. All it cost was my time. It's like, girl, that sounds like you put a lot of time into that. Like, what is your hourly rate for your life? Like, you should account for that somewhere, even
Right.
if you're doing it on a volunteer basis for the market. That sounds like you put a lot of time and effort. And if it's working really well and it's helping get customers to the market, it's probably something you're going to want to continue. Those signs aren't going to last forever. You might want to do more signs. So what is the time cost of that? It's not just the blank sign and the paint.
Right.
It's more than that. So please write that into your budget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Include it.
Mm-hmm.
Printed flyers and posters. So you're probably going to have some printing costs there. Social media, it doesn't have to be ads. Social media is quote unquote free, but posting has a cost in terms of somebody's time, just like you said about the signs. So somebody has to do it. Maybe you do want to place paid ads. Maybe you have a magazine or a local newspaper that you want to advertise in. Maybe you have a radio program you want to support. You can do that or not, depending on what your budget is when you first start. You may want to grow into that. Maybe there's paid ads involved. Participation in other events. So we do a lot of analog kind of marketing where we go out to a local school festival or we go out to a Taste of Main Street or something, and we set up a table and we pass out flyers and we maybe run a little raffle for market money and we talk about the market for 4 hours straight. Then we all have very sore throats afterwards. But that, whatever entry fee is in there, and a lot of times you can trade that for exposure at your market, whatever staff time is devoted to that, that can be a great investment, but there is a cost associated there.
Exactly. There's really like limitless ways you can market a farmer's market. I mean, it's just, you could really talk about that anywhere, anyhow. Folks like to hear about it. So there's a lot of ways you can do it, but just really weigh the costs of that, either what you're paying or your time.
Right.
Yep.
And included in you were talking about costs versus income. So you've got to include that in your costs.
Exactly. Yep.
Do not skimp on marketing. It's exactly what makes you valuable to your farmers and vendors.
Yes. If any market managers are in any type of vendor group online, which I'm in a few, just kind of not lurking around, but listening just to see what vendors are talking about and if they're having some kind of issue that it's like, oh, I can solve that at my market. I never thought about that from the vendor's point of view. But a lot of vendor feedback is, oh, I went to this or I signed up for an event, but they haven't said anything about it. I don't see it marketed anywhere. Oh, I'm like so anxious. Is this event going to be busy? I don't see it marketed anywhere. And maybe that event doesn't do so well for them or that market doesn't do so well for them because there's no marketing. So as market operators, that is part of our job. A big part of our job is to market the market.
Right.
So get people there. You are responsible for getting shoppers to the market. That's your job. So marketing in any kind of capacity is what we need to kind of focus on and make that a part of your plan for sure.
Yeah. If I'm looking at where I can cut expenses, marketing is not the place to start.
Never. No.
So you take all those costs and now we're going to compare those to income and see where we land. So what do we think about when we think about income? Reasonable space fees. You may have to start low and move up as your traffic increases if you're at a brand new market. If you're at an existing market, you may want to evaluate your space fees and see how they're measuring up to the costs that you already have or costs of things you might want to add, increased marketing, for instance. So you want to look at your space fees and keep an eye on those. You want to look at comp rates with other markets and events. So that's one of the things you have to consider when you set your space fees.
I think that's helpful to see because some folks just don't even know where to start. And so I always tell people, well, like look around at a market that's kind of a similar like neighborhood size that your market is in. Maybe like if they're a newer market, what are they charging? It's going to have the same kind of numbers that you have of vendors and farmers coming in. Maybe foot traffic will be similar. Look at those kind of things. Don't just compare across the board to any market because we're all our operating costs are all really different. If you look at a huge market that's really busy, you might say, oh, there's so many shoppers so they can charge their vendors a lot. Well, I charge my vendors a lot because it costs me a lot to run a huge market. The overhead cost is so high. So you should compare more to whatever size you're looking at because a smaller market is not free to operate, of course.
For sure.
But the overhead might be less because you have less staff, less barricades. Maybe you don't have to have traffic control or you don't have to have as many portable restrooms and things like that. So kind of keeping that in mind when you're looking at comp costs, comp rates.
And you have to charge more for your space fees because your overhead's higher.
Mm-hmm.
But those higher space fees are worth it to your farmers and vendors because
Yes.
your traffic is higher.
Exactly.
And your traffic is higher because your overhead's higher and you spend a lot on marketing. So it's all one big circle.
It's a circle. But when you're just looking at your market, just try to compare with a general, size and find some things that are like whatever market you're running or going to start.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You do want to make it sure it's enough to cover expenses. So if you're looking at comp rates in your area or comp rates for the same size of market and the same amount of traffic, and those are too low to cover your expenses, something's going to have to give. So we're going
Guess
to talk
what?
about that in a minute.
Guess what? If your income is less than your expenses, that doesn't work for any businesses, and farmers markets are included in that.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I think, again, the grant money that folks bring in for special projects, that totally makes sense. But if you're having to go out and get grant money to cover your actual operating expenses against your actual income, you don't have a business plan that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Sad but true.
We're talking about sustainability
Right.
and long-term success for these markets.
Exactly.
Yep.
And remember that free space rent is not necessarily beneficial to farmers and vendors. We hear a lot of folks, especially when they're just getting started, saying, oh, I don't want to charge my farmers. I don't want to charge my vendors for space. Or I want to charge them, oh gosh, somebody said the other day they were charging $15 a season. It's 18 markets in their season. It just didn't make any sense. And they were struggling. And that's why.
Yeah.
And they said, and a lot of my farmers and vendors are leaving, even though it's so incredibly it was like 50 cents a market or something. They're leaving and they're going to this other market that charges a big space fee. I don't understand. Well, that market that's charging a big space fee is probably spending a lot of money on marketing and on organization and on signage. And so the farmers and vendors are getting a better return from that because it's generating more traffic. So the lowest possible space fee is not always benefiting your farmers and vendors.
Exactly. It's
Good intentions, but it doesn't really pan out.
It's a hard thing to understand. And I think we get it too. We've been there trying to, figure out fees for our markets, but that is just not when you think about, I don't want them to have to pay, $20 or $40 more. Well, they're going to lose $20 or $40 per day if you're not bringing in enough money from the space fees to then turn that around for marketing to bring shoppers to the market who are going to give the farmers and vendors money. So you have to keep that in mind, and you just have to stick to the plan. You have to be consistent. It takes time to grow that into a system that makes sense where the shoppers are coming because you've done so much marketing. It doesn't take as long as maybe like a brick and mortar business or growing it into the biggest market in the city or something, but it takes time to make that happen. So just being open and honest with your farmers and vendors, explaining why there's a space fee, what you use it for, being really transparent about where that fee goes is really helpful. And I've really never had farmers and vendors, be like confused or outraged about a space fee, even the really high space fee after I explain it to them. And then they go, oh, okay, yeah, I wasn't thinking about those expenses.
I will say that's true. I hear so many people go, oh, I couldn't possibly raise my space fee $5. My farmers would revolt. I have never had a farmer or vendor actually push back on a reasonable increase in the space fee because they can see that I'm using it to benefit them.
Mm-hmm.
And I really think that insistence on a lower fee is more a lack of confidence in the manager or operator than it really is the farmer or vendor. Those are business people. They understand that there's a cost of doing business. You just got to claim it.
And they're selling their items as well. They're not giving away their corn for free. They are selling it because it cost them to make it or to grow it. So if you just explain it to them that way and say, hey, this space on the street costs me to have it here available for you between 3 and 7 p.m. on this day because of ABC, that's why it costs this much. Any reasonable person doing business will say, oh, okay, yes. And then they can make a choice if it's the day of the week works for them and the market works for them and all those things. But the space fee shouldn't be the thing that's like not working.
No, I think pulling those fruits and vegetables out of the ground and bringing them to the market and not selling them, that's a big expense.
That's what costs them.
Yes, that's what's costing them money, not paying a little bit more for the space and making those sales.
Yeah, exactly.
The other way you can generate income is local sponsorship. So without getting into complicated federal grants or anything, there are people that, as long as you're doing your marketing work and you're creating a community treasure that people want to come to, there's a lot of local businesses that are going to want to jump in and have access to that audience that you're creating. So it's really simple to sell local sponsorships for 4 or 5 times a normal vendor fee, maybe a little bit more than that, and giving them access to your audience.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to ask. And it's hard to sell. Sales is not for everybody. But I always just say, just make it a goal. I'm going to ask 25 businesses in the area, a variety of businesses, if they want to sponsor. Maybe 24 are going to say no, but one might give you like $1,000. And then you can use that to market the market. And that is going to benefit the farmers and vendors. That's going to benefit the market. So,
yeah, it's much easier than most people think. We run in every newsletter that we do, say for our little Chula Vista market, we will run an ad that says, thank you to our sponsor of the day, has their logo in it. And then we put a little tagline under that says, want to connect with your neighbors at the market this Sunday? Email. We get so many emails. I don't even have to do outreach. They come to me now.
Exactly. Just show them what they'll get for it. Just get a few good sponsors to start and then show other potential sponsors what they could have. And it could really help your bottom line. And that is income that you can use to, put in reserves in your business. You can use it for special projects. You can use that for operating costs, as long as you keep in mind that that's a one-time fee coming in, one at a time fee coming in, unless you get a good sponsorship program where it's regularly coming. But using that for operating costs, so then you're not relying on grants that you may or may not get approved for.
Right.
Sponsorship's more like...
Definitely more in your control.
Exactly. Yeah.
There are other types of sponsorships that'll come in as goodwill donations. Definitely also worth appealing to local healthcare agencies, to banks who are typically required to put some amount of money into the community. So you can pick up those as well. But I find that the sponsorships for people that want to gain access to your audience are the ones that tend to be more regular, something that'll come in on a weekly or monthly basis. Yeah. So a very large market may have a very large budget. But even a very new or a very small market is using the same income and expense formula to see if it's working or not. First of all, we suggest if you're starting a brand new market that you really are going to want to raise a little bit of funds up front to get things started, to buy that tent, to maybe lease a venue if you need to do that, to do some heavy-duty advertising to get you started. Anywhere from $2,500 to, for a really large market, maybe $10,000 or $12,000 to get started with all the permits and things is what we look for. We certainly have bootstrapped markets ourselves, and we've seen other people do it, but if you can get some upfront money to get things started, that's helpful. What we're looking at here is a little bit of math on how even a really small market can show a net income. So we're going to run through this real quick. You can make notes if you want, or we'll try to put some of this in the show notes. But say you have 20 booths, and you have a $20 booth fee. Far from unreasonable. That's going to come to $1,730 a month. Say you have a manager for 12 hours a week. I would say with 20 booths, you can do it in 12 hours a week. We certainly are not in a business where what do you do the other 6 days of the week? But if you have a fairly small market, you're only going to spend so much time on those applications and administrative tasks. So say you're paying $22, which is reasonable in most areas nowadays. 12 hours a week, you're going to come to $11.45 a month. Say you have an assistant that maybe makes $18 an hour and you use them for 4 hours just for during the market to help set up and take down and watch what's going on. We're going to throw $400 a month at overhead, $175 a month for marketing because that's roughly 10% of your income. That's a good kind of bench point to start with. If you can spend more, go for it. Okay, we've added it up. At this tiny little formula, you've got $1,730 a month in income. You have $2,032 a month in expenses. Wah, wah.
Wah, wah. Whoops.
This isn't going to work.
Mhm.
You got a $302 a month loss. That's going to add up quick.
Mhm.
So you have some solutions. You can raise your booth rent to $25. That'll move you to $2,165 a month in income. You now have $133 net.
Over time, over 12 months, you're banking that. You have reserve. You can use that for growth. You can use that to add more hours to your assistant manager's log. You can get more marketing dollars under your belt.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
You could sell 2 sponsorships a month at $150 each. Piece of cake. That's not very much for a sponsorship.
Mm-hmm.
That'd get you to $2,030 a month. Got a $1 loss on that, you're still going to have to raise your booth fee. You
Sorry.
can look at ways to reduce overhead. You could cut your manager's hours. Probably wouldn't consider that as your first solution. $12 a week is not that much, especially if you're growing a market. If you have a little tiny site and you're only going to stay at 20 booths per week, maybe you could cut the manager down a little bit once things get into a routine.
Mm-hmm.
You could add more farmers and vendors if you've got some space to grow. That certainly is going to be your best way to increase the income for your market.
Absolutely.
So the worst solutions are paying your manager less. Ideally, pay them a decent rate. We like to do a percentage of net to motivate managers. Next worst solution, reduce marketing. You don't want to do that. Marketing should be the absolute first thing after the very essential expenses that you have.
And then as you increase the number of your booths, your costs don't vary very much because those are static costs. I'd say your hours for your manager will go up maybe slightly, like with a big jump in vendors being added, just dealing with that many more, clients or vendors for yourself. So your costs for venue, toilet rentals, trash bags are going to stay pretty fixed until you make kind of like a large change of numbers of attendees that are coming to the market. And what you pay for staff, like I said, doesn't increase until you get much bigger. So that can stay static. So growing from a 20 vendor market to a 30 or 35 vendor market creates income that is almost all available to spend on marketing and staff and reach the point where that's all balanced. And then you have a discretionary income for nutrition education, kids programming, and more. And that is all with or without grant funding. So this is all the self-funded market.
Right.
We like to say your market should be self-funded. And then the extra funds that you get from grants, if that's something that your market gets, goes into that kind of additional programming or additional offerings. But what we're really offering is a place for farmers and local food makers to sell and a place for shoppers to come and buy local food. That's the heart of the market. That's the core.
Farmers markets do so much for their communities. At their heart, they support farmers and let them keep farming. They incubate small businesses, and they provide a place for neighbors to meet each other and the people who feed them. Remember your mission. Make that core strong, and additional funding and opportunities will follow as you grow in attendance and visibility. Farmers markets don't just happen. You make them happen.
Thanks for listening to Tent Talk today. And big thanks to the Catamaran Resort at Pacific Beach in San Diego for hosting the Intense National Farmers Market Conference and for supporting Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast. Register now to stay in the heart of conference activities and enjoy Mission Bay, the beach, local markets, and restaurants this coming March 1st through 4th, 2026. For more information or to reserve your room, click the Catamaran logo on the resource page at farmersmarketpros.com.
Thanks for listening to Tent Talk today. Please leave us a review on your podcast app or wherever you listen to Tent Talk. Let us and others know how you're enjoying the podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode of Tent Talk. Connect with fellow Farmers Market folks in our private Facebook group, the Farmers Market Pros Community, and follow us on Instagram at Farmers Market Pros. Find online education and other resources at farmersmarketpros.com. Tent Talk is brought to you by Farmers Market Pros, where passion meets profit. Tent Talk is hosted by Kat Fields White and Bridget Myers and produced by Leandra Hayes, with original music by David Mead. Tune in next week for another great episode.